Welcome to Standard Deviation.
Hello, it's Yara.
Hi, Kevin.
And hello to all our listeners and viewers. Greetings from the zombie apocalypse of 2020.
Yeah, happy quarantine.
Yeah. So our last episode was a week ago, yeah?
Yeah.
Give or take.
Mm-hmm. Because we are consistent podcast releasers who release once a week.
Yeah.
Always.
We never miss a week.
Never have.
Never will.
2 years going strong.
That's right. So yeah, it's March 27th, 2020. We're in quarantine due to the coronavirus. And I guess just awaiting the end of the world. Got another gun since last week.
Yeah, Kevin
and some
forced me really to buy a shotgun.
I didn't force it.
He would wait until I was really high on edibles and easily freaked out to just talk all Doomsday to me. And that was some psychological manipulation into getting me a shotgun.
No, it was just persistence. I mean, it wasn't manipulative because it was true. I was just saying, you should be scared.
Yeah, Kevin is very Doomsday worst case scenario type thinker.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily think that the worst case scenarios will transpire, but I don't find them at all difficult to imagine transpiring.
So what does that mean? What does that look like?
What does it look like?
Yeah, worst case scenario.
Oh, well, I mean, the worst case scenario is that we just get killed early when the mobs come to eat our food.
Okay, slow down a bit though. Okay. Talk about like where we are now. I'm trying to get you to talk about you're reading that Green Beret book and the steps towards collapse.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it's hard to say what's going to happen, but I think some of the things we should be keeping an eye on are disruptions to infrastructures. So the economic disruption right now is hard to predict because we're still really early. I mean, it's still really month one of the major effects. I think the virus has been around. It's been known since I think January.
Yeah.
Right. But it wasn't until early March that people really started to take it very seriously, at least in the States. So at this point, most people, or at least a lot of people, are staying home, either because they've been ordered to by local health authorities or because their workplaces asked them to or whatever.
Or they've been laid off.
Yeah. And in an attempt to prevent spreading the virus, people are staying quarantined. So there's a huge economic disruption currently starting. People aren't getting their income. They're not paying their rent. They're not able to buy food that isn't available to buy anyway. So that's a big deal, and we'll have repercussions for years at least if we recover. But then there's also other stuff to consider, like the strain on the system when labor and money are no longer available is, I guess, the best case scenario is that it's unpredictable. The worst case scenario is that it's quite predictable and it leads to the breakdown of civilization, potentially. So I don't know exactly what KPIs or metrics people would be looking at in this situation to know what's happening next or to know how likely it is that society will just break down entirely. But the things that I'm looking at are crime rates, utility outages. Those are really the big ones. Panic buying, we already saw. People bought all the toilet paper a month ago.
Yeah.
Followed by food and water because we're so smart. Go for toilet paper first, right? It went toilet paper, guns, food. And now medicine, because Trump is touting miracle cures for the virus that, as far as I know, are not proven yet. And so there's shortages of medicines that people are actually already using for other things, like autoimmune disease and malaria. So given a shortage due to panic buying, a shortage on sanitary goods, food, weapons, and medicine, I think food and water really running scarce. Well, water would be less likely in the short term, but food running scarce is pretty likely. In terms of disruptions to utilities like water and electricity, I haven't yet found a reliable source of data on this. I spent a few hours yesterday trying to research it to see if there's an uptick, and haven't. It turns out that most municipalities just don't report this data very well. and it doesn't appear to be aggregated or centralized anywhere. I did find reports from an industry magazine in the nuclear energy industry, which was very concerned about nuclear energy system maintenance and capacity. But one thing is the internet. So the internet's like a quasi-utility, you know? There's actually legislation I think there are people pushing for legislation to reclassify the internet as a utility so that it's guarded by public regulations the same way water and electricity are. But at the moment it's not. Regardless of the legal minutia, though, the internet appears to be wavering at the moment. It's not doing so well.
Yeah, Netflix wasn't working last night.
Yeah, we had a Netflix outage. Yesterday in the morning, there was a wide-scale Google outage of everything from Nest home security cameras to Gmail to Google Drive to Google Search. And according to them, it was not a capacity issue. They were very clear on that. They said it was due to a router failure in Atlanta, Georgia, that caused global issues as the traffic was redirected, which was a capacity issue. But I'm left wondering what caused the router failure. You know, if that was not a capacity issue, was it a power issue?
I mean, does that sort of thing happen?
Not very often. I mean, you don't see Google going down on that scale. I mean, I would strain to remember 2 or 3 times Google services were unavailable to me. And I don't know how that scale compares. I haven't cross-referenced to the other outages, but it seemed like a big deal. And given that utilities, just like everybody else, are operating on a skeleton crew, it seems just common sense that...
What's a skeleton crew?
Just a minimum staff.
Oh.
So it seems common sense that those systems aren't going to work as well as they would, and that means that power outages and other types of utility outages, I don't see how they wouldn't increase. Now, there is something to consider. I spoke to a guy yesterday who is tracking utility outage data as a hobby, which is cool. I can't remember his website. I think it's poweroutage.us or something like that. And he gave me some thoughts, and he said what he's noticed anecdotally, and again, this is just a hobbyist compiling data he hasn't done a deep dive into, but he's noticed a decrease in power outages, and he speculates that that's because most outages that are reported are like drunk drivers hitting telephone poles and things like that. So as people are at home more, there's actually less physical damage to power systems. What I'm worried about is what about all the maintenance that's not being done, and what about the little blips that are usually accounted for either proactively or reactively that aren't being accounted for now? And when does that become a problem? You know,
I'm just amazed at how fragile the whole system is and how like interconnected everything is and how easily like it's just like a domino effect.
Yeah, the thing is, a lot of our civil infrastructure runs on momentum. Mm-hmm. So like two or 3 weeks ago, the airline industry like immediately said we need $50 billion or the whole industry will collapse. If a major transportation system like flight goes away, that's obviously a big deal. But it also highlights how like they're only running on momentum. Like they only have their doors open. They're in operation because people are buying tickets every day.
Right.
And if they stop for 2 days...
It's living paycheck to paycheck on a grand scale.
Exactly. Yeah. It's kind of like fractional reserve banking, where you have like bank runs where people freak out and want to take their money out of a bank, and so the economy collapses because that money ain't there. Banks only have, I think on average, something like 10% of the money that you deposit. They don't have your money. If you get it out, it's only because there weren't other people trying to get theirs out. But at any given time, they have approximately 10% of the money that has been put into them. The rest of it's invested in various stocks and bonds and such. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, yeah, things are interesting. And yeah, so I've been prepping. I'm a prepper now.
Yeah.
And one of the books I got was this great book by a guy named Bob Mayer. It's called the Green Beret Preparation and Survival Guide or something like that. And you know, I think it's self-published and like it's not the most glossy book, and there's like typos and stuff, but the information appears to be quite solid.
And it's very well written. I think it's very like easy to read and like plain spoken language, which I always appreciate.
Yeah, and you can tell a lot of it's very practical. And one of the things that I like about it that's also very concerning is that a lot of the things I've been thinking are things this guy is saying in the book. One of which stood out that, like, years ago, I started writing a zombie apocalypse story because I like to write stories sometimes. And it got me thinking, like, what would I actually do in a zombie apocalypse? And aside from the obvious stuff like food, water, and weapons, it occurred to me that, like, hardware stores would be valuable to raid and loot. But then also bookstores and libraries. That's something you just never hear people talking about. But the information out there, whether it's combat or vehicle maintenance, first aid, agriculture, plumbing, there's just so much valuable information in print and without the internet, you would have to rely on print for new information, print and just talking to people. And anyway, he made the point that that's actually bookstores and libraries would be the most important place to scavenge, provided that you have food and water. And I felt validated by that, but also concerned because he also has a chapter on how to know when civilization is crumbling. And he lists some examples of things, and a pandemic is one, and a major economic disruption is another. And yeah.
And rioting, or not rioting, but, rioting would be one of them, but I was trying to think of hoarding. Hoarding,
yeah. Panic buying. And he drew some comparisons that I had been drawing for the last week between, he didn't draw comparisons, but he used the example of 1930s Germany, pre-Nazi Germany, as an example where the civilization was collapsing and there were signs, and some people saw them, others saw them and chose to go into denial about it, but it was dire and it was predictable, at least at a certain point in the progression. And I think that we're potentially several years into that point, and that this may be the tipping point.
Yeah, do you see, like, some malevolent sociopath, like, coming and taking over in the same way because we're so vulnerable?
I don't know. Like some kind of narcissist,
yeah,
with orange spray tan. Perhaps?
I don't know what you're talking about. Hey, speaking of, we actually had a comment on our last YouTube video from a guy who was, like, surprised that we were shit talking Trump.
Yeah,
and he said that maybe I should pull up the exact comment here real quick. Sorry, I didn't really prepare for this. Yeah, I want to get it right here.
I saw the question, and I meant to actually prepare to answer it thoroughly because I think it's a fair question.
Yeah, and it kind of highlights, like, we really, I think, take for granted, or at least I do, I'll speak for myself, living in Portland and kind of living in a liberal bubble, that I don't really, like, people think differently than we do. And I forget that sometimes. So this is what he said. Could you talk about what your beef with Trump is? Before he was elected, I thought, no way this is real. But since then, he's said a lot of stupid stuff, but done a lot of necessary stuff. The American economy was doing great since he took office. On foreign policy, his engagement with North Korea couldn't have been handled better, and his wall building / illegal immigration policy has been proven right with the coronavirus. Proven right with the coronavirus. His reaction to which has been praised even by some Democrats. Why wouldn't you vote for him next election?
Leave that up. Yeah, so I don't. To be fair, I think it's impossible for anyone to only do wrong things. So I'm sure Trump has done some stuff right, and I don't mean only by luck. Like, I'm sure he has some talents, and he's been right about some things. Foreign policy, I mean, from a peripheral view, admittedly, I've been somewhat disengaged, but I'd be surprised to learn that he's considered a whiz on foreign policy. The North Korea thing, yeah, I still don't know all the details of that. It was surprising. What exactly? I think if I remember correctly, he met with Kim Jong-un.
Yeah.
And Kim Jong-un said he would disarm or stop nuclear production or something. But then I think, like, 2 days later said, no, I'm not. And
I haven't been paying much attention to that. All I remember is that he said he had a small penis on Twitter.
Wait, who what?
Trump said Kim Jong-un. He, like, implied he had a small penis.
Did he?
Yeah.
That's not surprising.
And that he had the big penis.
Oh, my God. Anyway, yeah, that couldn't have been handled any better. Wall building, illegal immigration policy. I don't know that that's been proven right with the coronavirus. I haven't seen any analysis or commentary on that. But, I mean...
Well, let's just talk about his reaction to the coronavirus, because I'm shocked that anyone would think that his reaction was good. And I'm curious to know what Democrats praised him.
Yeah.
because his reaction was terrible. He denied it was a problem.
Yeah.
And then was like, oh, emergency. And then now I hear he's saying that we don't need as many ventilators as, the experts are saying we're going to need, and we're going to open up by Easter again.
Yeah, I mean, yesterday, two of the headlines that I saw, one was that a New York City nurse died in a hospital where the staff are now wearing trash bags because they're so short on surgical supplies. And two was that Trump said that he doesn't think states requesting emergency equipment actually need it. And this is just one slice of the many examples of Trump's reaction that seem quite out of touch, if not just pathological.
Yeah.
He's a narcissist. He's malignant. He claims to know things he doesn't know. He gets things wrong. He scares people. I'm sure he's done some stuff right also, I guess. Hard to say what exactly. And to be fair, I think anybody in his position, anybody in a position of public administration during a time of crisis is in a very tough spot, because the instinct from a layperson is to think that they need to be entirely honest with us and transparent at every step. But the problem is, with ambiguity, it's not clear exactly what's true, and rampant speculation by leaders is not good leadership. In addition to that, sometimes even the truth may not be the best thing to talk about, because the repercussions of bad timing or bad phrasing of something that may actually be true the repercussions could end up being a lot worse than the threat that's being discussed.
Yeah, we could cause a panic that would be a much bigger problem than the virus.
Exactly. And I mean, I've heard, I don't know all the details, but I read somewhere that the CDC has kind of both extremes in their past, where with H1N1 and with Ebola, in one case they overreacted, or they were perceived to have overreacted, and in one case they underreacted. And it's very much a political, to one extent, it's a political game. But then on the other hand, it's also a really pragmatic logistical problem, where on the one hand you want people aware of risks and taking precautions, but if they freak out, then it definitely is much worse in the long run, and sometimes in the short run, if people overreact.
Yeah, the second coronavirus podcast that Sam Harris did, I forgot who he talked to, but that guy, I remember, seemed like relatively optimistic, I suppose, like a little too optimistic, and was like kind of had this attitude of like, it's it's a problem, but it's going to be fine and all this. And I think there's one really telling part where he said, I worry more about the panic from this than I do the virus. So that to me sounded like he was maybe really kind of toning it down for that reason, which makes sense, but it also might mean that he wasn't quite as blunt and honest as he should have been.
Right. And I think he was introduced himself as someone who specializes in communicating with the public about things like pandemics. And that says to me that this is a guy who they call in to calm everybody down, which doesn't mean he's lying.
Right.
But I think he's, by default, he's taking a biased approach in favor of being conservative, which is fine. It's good to have balance. Yeah. I mean, but yeah, the risk of, that's another thing, is I keep forgetting when I'm talking to people and talking about what I'm worried about. Some of my concern is about the virus, and I consider myself pretty vulnerable to it. I'm a smoker, for one, which is stupid, but also getting a common cold annually for me, more often than not, lasts for a month or two. Last year, I think I developed a hernia and a cracked rib from coughing from a cold that I had, or a flu that I had for 7 or 8 weeks. So, I could die from this virus, and that's concerning. But that's not what I'm thinking about every day. What I'm thinking about is what is going to happen to society from this. And that's the thing, is there's two components to surviving something like this, and one is don't die from the virus, and then two is don't die from whatever happens after that, because damn,
Yeah, everything seems so fragile right now. It's really scary. And I still can't get a good idea of how much people understand. I was talking to someone, I told you this, I was talking to someone the other day, and he was asking if I had any travel plans after all this. And I'm like, well, no, I mean, I think it's kind of silly to make any kind of plans at this point. It's pretty open-ended. But I mentioned Burning Man. I was like, yeah, I was looking forward to going to Burning Man, as I do every year, but I don't think it's going to happen. And he said, oh, it's definitely going to happen. And I'm like, all right, why are you so confident? Like, what do you know that I don't? And he's like, they can't keep people inside that long. They won't do it. And I'm like, all right, but they postponed the Olympics, you know, to 2021. And even that doesn't have an exact date. It's just sometime next year. And he's like, well, that's different. I'm like, okay, how's it different? And he said, if an athlete gets sick with the coronavirus and it cost him or her the medal, well, that's going to be a big deal. I'm like, that's not why they're postponing it. They're postponing it because it's a public health issue. It's about the crowd of people that it's attracting, not about any star athlete. I mean, obviously they're a person too, and that's, you know, we don't want anyone to get sick, but it's about a big gathering. And then I don't know, we were talking online, so it's always hard to tell with tone and stuff. But then he said he was just joking, and so I don't know what the joke was, or if he was just backpedaling, or I have no idea. But it just told me, I was like, I still think people don't really get it. I think some people think that this is going to be over in a week, or I don't know.
Yeah, and I mean, like the repercussions. Like I from what I just said, even if it sounds fantastical or paranoid, it might sound like I've done a lot of thinking or research on this, but I haven't. I have not. I'm doing a lot of stuff right now. I have many irons in the fire, and this is one component of every day that gets a little attention, which is funny when you think about it. The impending end of the world only gets a slice of my time. But there's a lot of stuff yet to be considered by most people. I would imagine there are specialists in government and some in civilian life who have considered a great many things, who already knew far ahead of this what sort of things to consider, you know, because they simulate these sorts of catastrophes in the government as just standard operating procedure. So, but I mean, every time I check the news, there's something more concerning, often things I hadn't thought of. Like last night I saw that GM, General Motors, has suspended production indefinitely. Also, they cut pay, which is also bad. But I mean, that's a big deal.
That is a big deal. That's our cars.
Yeah. and what it represents, I mean, I don't know how to contextualize or juxtapose GM with the broader economy or its slice of the particular industry in the economy, but it's a big player and a long-standing one and very robust. And it's not good that it's ceasing operations.
Yeah, and we have a friend who works in a hospital. He's a PA, and we have two friends actually. And this is just starting, and he's saying it's like a third world country at work. They are spread so thin already. They cut their pay in half as well. And he says that like all, not regulation, what's the word?
Best practices.
Yeah, all the practices has just gone out the window, and they've told him just figure it out on the fly.
Yeah,
and they don't have tests to test people for coronavirus, so all he can do is check for a fever and ask where they've flown to.
So the medical industry, the medical profession really operates largely on standards of patient care that are pretty well established in most cases, and given how litigious our society is, you can't step very far out of line from standards before you're sued. So people take it seriously when they're practitioners, and and from what I hear, many practitioners are being told by their management to take basically to make executive decisions about standards of care on the fly and to disregard existing best practices and guidelines.
Yeah.
And that at the time was the most concerning thing I had heard about any of this so far. The fact that hospitals are willing to tell their practitioners, don't worry about patient care guidelines.
Just use your best judgment.
Yeah. I mean, that's unimaginable.
Yeah. And, he made the point, he's like, normally I tell people that they, I assign them a physical therapist, and I can't do that now because everyone's supposed to be quarantined, and so he's like, I'm just kind of writing off prescriptions for pills for everyone. I saw this other article that talked about like, if we get through this, like we're going to have another wave of just mental health issues to deal with, just from people having to stay inside, the trauma of all this. Like,
I saw a Trump quote recently where somebody was saying that it was about him wanting to reopen the economy quickly, and apparently one of the reasons he gave was because if people are stuck indoors, you'll just see a huge rash of suicides.
So people are going to die?
And I was like, well, he's probably right. But God, Trump, you got to just maybe learn how to talk better, you know? Because, I mean, yeah, you may see a lot of suicides from people being trapped indoors, but like, if you're trying to calm the populace and rally, you don't say, look, we got to expose each other to a deadly virus and kill off a lot of us so that most of us don't just commit suicide being stuck indoors. And also we have to save the economy. Like, it's just such a muddled, horrible message.
Yeah. And if, like, I read something else earlier that kind of made something clear, because one of the things that I think people are having a hard time understanding is, okay, so it's, there's this argument that maybe we should go for the herd immunity route, which basically means we just go business as usual, let the virus spread. Sorry, some people are going to die, but then eventually it will burn out and it'll be over. And maybe that's just, you know, there's no easy answers here. But maybe that's the least worst answer than destroying our economy and then, you know, whatever else. The reason that we need to at least flatten the curve now, even though, sorry, I'm not explaining myself well. So we flatten the curve now, but then what happens when we go out? Well, outbreaks happen again. So people are arguing like we're just delaying the inevitable. But the reason we need to do it now is because we need to buy ourselves time. And the more time we have now to understand this virus and to make ventilators and to prepare our resources, the better. And that's why it's important to, like, we need as much time as we can now. You have to imagine, like, let's say you're going to war. Do you want to just go to war right now and get it over with? Or do you want to have like some weeks to like prepare?
Yeah, that's a good point. And while I don't think that reopening the economy in a couple weeks is, I don't even know what to call it, the economy. It's not.
Just society.
Yeah,
we live in a society.
Right. Trying to resume normal physical associations in America in a couple weeks.
That's going to destroy the economy too, is the thing. Well, like, if we just open things up again and overwhelm our hospitals and people are dying, like, that too is going to destroy the economy.
Yeah, so I think it my inclination is that it's a bad idea. But on the other hand, I have to say, I don't know that it's a worse idea than continuing to shutter things because of everything that I started off saying. I mean, I'm not, and just to be clear, I'm not fear-mongering, and I'm not even paranoid, and I'm not saying that I think civilization is about to collapse. What I'm saying is that if it did, I wouldn't be surprised. And if there is not a good solution to this situation, so if reopening the economy mitigates a disruption that could lead to pandemonium and potentially war, either on a national or international level, then I understand. I wouldn't want to be in the position of telling everybody to go risk dying so that you don't die in a war 2 years from now. But I kind of get it. Then again, that's not even what Trump's saying, really.
Yeah.
And you would think that he could at least, like, if he's going to say that he's concerned people are going to commit suicide in mass numbers, I would appreciate it at least if he would go ahead and also say that he's concerned about the complete deterioration of society, because I'm thinking about that, and I want to hope somebody in government is thinking about that. And if he's going to talk out of his ass anyway, he might as well say that. And if he's not, then I don't know if that's something being considered at the executive level, and it should be.
Yeah.
He's not very good at keeping secrets, you know.
That's true.
Have you? One of his habits is just openly talking about classified things. Like just bragging, or just because he's an idiot and forgot it was classified or something. But there was like a whole legal battle in the beginning of his presidency because of that. And I think the kind of the party line at this point is that if the president discusses it publicly, it's no longer classified. So it's fine. He's not divulging classified information because the moment he divulges it, it's not classified, which is quite a loophole.
Right.
Anyway.
I have a maybe dumb question. So does he have to run for president?
For re-election, you mean?
Yeah.
No.
He can just be like, no.
He can just quit. Yeah.
I mean, I guess that the moment it came out of my mouth, it's like, how can you force someone to do that? But it seems like that's what what presidents always do if they're up for re-election. Like, has there been a case where they're like, no, that was enough. Let's pass this along?
I don't think in modern times, maybe not ever. I think the only times I can think of are cases where like a president was like impeached or had to quit early or something.
Right.
But I can't think of any. I don't really know presidential history very well, but I don't know of any that just chose not to run again. They're like, this sucks, I quit.
Yeah. I saw this tweet from someone that said, has anyone tried just asking Trump if he doesn't want to be president anymore? Like, it might work.
That's a good point. Yeah. He's joked about it, and about how he doesn't really like it, and it's a lot of work. Yeah, I mean, early on, I can't remember if it was before or after he was elected, but I think, right after, a couple months in, he was like, yeah, it's a lot more work than I thought. And and I kind of got the sense that he was really bored with it. Like, it's a lot of like political stuff. Like, the president doesn't do as much executive stuff as a lot of people think. Most of it's actually his staff and like his chief of staff and his team that does a lot of the actual work. And the president's very much a model, posing for pictures and signing documents that somebody else prepared. And
yeah, and I might be reading too much into this, and also I haven't seen everything, but what I've seen of him lately, the talks, the press releases or whatever you call them, to the public, like, he seems like toned down. Like, he just seems like he's kind of going through the motions. Yeah,
he does seem like maybe he's worn out and he's just like operating on like motor memory and just following what his aides say. Finally, maybe, I don't know. You know what I'm a little worried about? There's that whole election coming, and I don't like how that's going. Like, I guess Biden is the front. Was he? We done?
He's the front runner.
Yeah. Are the primaries even happened? God, I'm so out of touch.
No, I am too. I had to look it up. I thought our primaries were in March, but it was actually May. It's May 17th is when we vote here in Oregon.
Biden seems like a real bad choice, people. And like, again, I'm not an expert on this, but fuck, we had Elizabeth Warren was an option, and we have Bernie Sanders as an option, and Biden. Like, the only clips I've seen of him in the last couple of months, he's barely conscious.
Yeah, his brain is melting.
Yeah, he really, and I know people say that, Trump seems like he might have dementia, and, he's definitely a little kooky, but, like, when I see Biden, I'm just like, oh, God, that man needs to be, like, fed from a tube soon. This is not the guy you want to put in charge.
Yeah, and Bernie's old as shit too, but man, he's sharp.
Great. Yeah. Did you see that video of him just railing Congress the other day about? So there's the stimulus package that I guess is finally done. I think it's going to be like $2 trillion or something. They're sending a bunch of checks to people to God knows do what with, to wipe their ass with, I guess, since there's no toilet paper and currency doesn't mean shit when nobody's producing anything. But
you got bills to pay still.
Right, yeah, and I'm sure they'll all get paid by $1,000 check in 3 months.
Yeah.
What was I saying? Oh, right. So one of the delays was that the Republicans, from what I hear, didn't want everybody to get checks because, certain people are so poor that presumably they haven't given enough into the system to get a check back. So it was delayed while they tried to prevent poor people from getting checks being sent to poor people. And there was this clip of
that's the point of taxes. Right. You put in to help people that are like less fortunate, and then someday you might be in that position when you're old and sick and need health care.
There was a great clip of Bernie like literally yelling at them, just like you fucking assholes. Like, seriously. You're the same people giving tax cuts to corporations and billionaires, and you're meanwhile making this asinine, hypocritical argument about poor people getting more than they would otherwise get, as if that's some kind of a problem, as if they're getting enough to begin with. And seeing him just really letting them have it like that, and he was very clear, very articulate on the spot. And then thinking about just the last time I saw Biden mumbling incoherently
about his hairy legs.
Hairy legs?
Yeah, did you see that clip? He's like, you watch it and you're just like, what, Grandpa? Like, he's doing, I don't even know what it's for, but he starts going off about when he was a young kid being in a pool and his blonde hairs were like floating in the water, and all the young black boys would come and like touch his hair on his legs.
What?
I'm dead
what
serious.
Was the context?
I don't know, because I've only seen that short clip, but everyone shares it like, what the fuck is he talking about? What could possibly be the context? I guess he's just trying to tell a story, but it just sounded like rambling.
God. How did
the only like explanation I can come up with is like, he was the Obama guy, and so normies of the world that don't pay attention to politics, which, by the way, I would like to see a government run so well that we shouldn't have to pay much attention to politics, but here we are. people that aren't paying that much attention are just like, okay, the Obama guy. Yeah, that one. That seems safe. And that's why he's ahead.
Do you think it's because Bernie is what is he? Democratic socialist?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, people think he's a socialist, and that's like a dirty word here.
Yeah, people think that's like extremism. And, you know, like another thing I saw today was so Republicans, I think at this point are basically saying we should go ahead and reopen the economy, get out there, and, you know, if the old people die, then that's just what you got to do for the next generation. And on the one hand, like I was saying, I see a certain amount of logic in that. I'm not endorsing it, but I understand to the extent that it's not a disingenuous argument. I get why that could actually be the right thing. But then on the other hand, somebody made the good point that like these are the same people who were so terrified of death panels from the push for universal health care that this might lead to a bureaucracy where people decide resource allocation and decide who dies, and like that's unacceptable for old people to die so that everybody gets health care, which was a made up argument in the first place. But it's fine for old people to die so that everybody can go to work. And again, I get why just going to work isn't it's not quite that simple, but they're right. It is the same piece of shit hypocrites making both arguments that people don't need universal health care because of made-up death panels, but they do need to be able to go to work, and they shouldn't get much money if they're already too poor to mean anything.
Ugh. It's gross.
It is. So we bought a shotgun.
Yes, I'm going to learn to shoot a shotgun.
Last episode, we got whiskey and a handgun. And this episode, we got pot and a shotgun.
Yeah.
So I think we're good. Yeah, it's a beautiful gun. It's in the mail. Haven't received it yet. I don't know much about shotguns yet, but it's a good one. I'm excited.
Protect my property.
For those that care, it's a Mossberg 590A1. So that's pretty badass. Sounds cool.
Yeah, guns are very expensive right now. The price has gone up. You called around all the shops here to see if they had this gun, and they didn't, so you had to go to auction site.
Not only did they not have this model, but they didn't have any Mossbergs, probably not many shotguns at all. Several of them said none of their suppliers have any, which is interesting. So yeah, I had to go to an auction site to find one. No, there was no home defense 9mm ammo when I grabbed my gun. And the gun I wanted, in 24 hours, it was gone, and then the second choice was gone within the same 24 hours. And fortunately, I ended up with my third choice, which is actually a much better gun. It's the Beretta M9A3. But yeah, that's a concern. And I mean, there is like this kind of joke about gun rushes, you know, because a lot of people who buy guns, whether reactively or just for fun, they are paranoid very often. And like every time somebody mentions a criticism of the NRA in the media, you'll just see guns and ammo sales skyrocket, and any talk of gun control will do it.
Apparently gun sales go up after every school shooting too.
Wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, because they're afraid of coming regulations. But at the same time, you know, sometimes when they're right, they're right. And the spread of a pandemic and panic buying.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't like guns. I'm in favor of gun control, and I'm a liberal, and
you like guns a little bit.
Oh, I do. On some level, I like guns, but like just seems like an overly simplistic term, because I fucking hate guns. You know, I mean, they're horrifying, terrible things, but they're fun, and they're also useful if you do need to defend yourself or your home or your family, and you know. So I have a nuanced take on guns. I do think gun control is a good idea to some extent. I don't know all the ins and outs, but certainly regulations are good. But I am definitely stocking up on weapons at the moment.
Yeah.
Some knives, survival hatchet. Think about getting a baseball bat.
Yeah. One interesting thing about that Green Beret book that you mentioned you got is that they added an addendum, I imagine, in the last week that includes the coronavirus.
Yeah, he wrote the chapter on March 2nd, and it arrived on like March 17th or something.
Yeah, so it was like just because like when I bought it on Amazon, it was just this green book that had the title on it, and then when we received it, it was just like this big red bar across it.
It had the bar on Amazon.
Oh, I didn't see it.
Yeah,
I don't think so.
I did when I was reviewing it before ordering it.
Oh, okay. Well, on my orders, I remember looking at it. It didn't have it, and then we get it, and it had this red bar. It said a coronavirus addendum. It's like, oh, Jesus.
Yeah, and it had pretty good information, too. I think the way that was able to happen so quickly is because it appears to be self-published, and that means it's just this guy who's just added a chapter, didn't have to go to a publisher for anything, and it's probably published on the fly or maybe in batches. But yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of really interesting information out there. I'm actually focusing a lot of my research on public domain books put out by the military and intelligence community, because in the U.S., pretty much everything the government produces in terms of literature is public domain because it was created with tax dollars, so it's considered public property. So that means that there's a lot of really interesting stuff that you wouldn't really expect to find distributed for free by the military, like counterintelligence operations, psychological warfare, small unit tactics, security, hacking. There's all kinds of really interesting shit out there that the government, the military, and intelligence communities rely on to learn and train, but you can just download and, it's yours. And I've been doing that, printing some of it because I'm not entirely confident in the power grid or the internet.
Yeah, we got a big old box of printer paper.
We did, but don't tell anybody.
People coming after our printer paper.
Right. Yeah. And, I'll also say that a lot of this is stuff that I was already really interested in. Just for years I've been interested in combat and security and intelligence and survival.
It's been a good excuse for you to deep dive.
It has, yeah. And I'm glad that I did whatever peripheral research I did over the years just as a hobby for fun, because it kind of gave me some footing to start all this. But, yeah, it's not... It is interesting to me already. So a lot of this is just because I enjoy certain aspects of preparation, but at the same time, there's a lot more preparation that I think I don't even have time for that needs to be done. That's hard to even conceptualize at this point, because informational systems is one huge one. Like months ago, I suggested to Elon Musk on Twitter that he's perhaps help us build a distributed modern Library of Alexandria. The idea being that if in the event of a grid collapse, either from war or a pandemic or a solar flare that could do it, most people will lose access to most information. So having things like libraries and bookstores participate in a sort of self-governing, protected information distribution network would be really important. You would need geographically dispersed points of information accrual to rebuild whatever is destroyed in the event of a major catastrophe. And that idea is looking more and more sexy these days,
Yeah, but you know what happened to the Library of Alexandria?
Yeah, that's why I think a distributed version is much better. Because even one earthquake could take out a primary library.
Yeah, or just
but if you
one
have
person.
Yeah, one person. And in a way, libraries are already what I'm describing, in a way.
Yeah.
It's just that it's not, to my knowledge, nobody has actually taken the time to delineate and organize a system of information storage and retrieval that would specifically be like the first point of reference and fallback in a catastrophe. And depending on the scale of a catastrophe, other people are going to have these ideas, and you're going to, if things were utter pandemonium tomorrow, I'd say within a week or so, you'd probably see all bookstores and libraries under siege by competing armed factions, at least the smart ones.
What do you think is going to happen when they develop a vaccine for this with the anti-vaxxers of the world? Because I've already I started. It's funny. I was talking to you earlier about a lot of people are talking about the people that the types of people that are reaching out to them or they're reaching out to during this time, like a lot of ex-lovers and stuff like that. And I reached out to a friend I hadn't talked to in years, and she was she's like, oh yeah, I'm not going to take the vaccine when they have it.
Really?
Yeah. I was like, Jesus Christ.
Is she just total across the board anti-vaxxer? Or?
I didn't think so, but I didn't really dig too deeply. It was one of those things, the more I thought about it, I was like, what? Where is she coming from with that? But she's totally freaked out about everything. She thinks this might be the end of civilization as well. But yeah, she made the point, she's like, oh, I'm not taking the vaccine.
Yeah, I don't know. I think vaccines are more good than bad. They are risky at times and for different people. Certainly there are negative effects of vaccines, probably more so with new ones. But
which, by the way, is why it's going to take 12 to 18 months to get one is because they need to see what the long-term effects are before they just start giving it to people. And then also just distribution in general is difficult on a large scale.
Yeah, and then imagine distribution a year into bare minimum skeleton crews and dire economic impacts.
Right.
Those supply lines, like we were talking about Burning Man earlier, and just imagining like the amount of material wealth required to make Burning Man happen every year is it's easily taken for granted. But I mean, you show up like strapped to the nines with survival gear and water and food and gadgets and elaborate systems that may not exist in a week, let alone a few months from now.
Mm.
I mean, even just the water required to run Burning Man probably isn't on the market.
Mm. Freaking
Thanks
me out,
for tuning
man.
in, everybody.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, and again, it's not... This could go lots of different ways. This could also lead to a much better society soon. I mean, it could lead to things like an increased reliance on high-quality data, technology, universal healthcare, socialism, universal basic income. There's things that can come of this that could be very positive. Mm-hmm. And it could be both. I mean, it could end up being kind of a 50-50 split where like the quality of life in a year or 10 years is no better and no worse than it is now. But I think that it's a mistake to feel a sense of security because, you know, a couple months ago things were basically stable in society, because they always are until they aren't. You know, and history does repeat itself, and this isn't unprecedented. Pandemics and the economic impacts of pandemics and various other factors are known to cause destabilization of highly functional civilizations. So.
Yeah, it's still so wild to me how quickly this all happened. Like, I'm looking at pictures of myself in Bali, like, 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I'm like, simpler times.
Yeah.
Feels like forever ago now. But it's like, man. Did you ever see that video of the Italians making videos for their video messages for themselves 10 days ago?
No.
They made it, it's like a compilation thing, and it was to warn like basically us because we're about 10 days behind them, and it's them just like warning their 10-day-old past self about what's about to happen. And it's like, all right, I know you've heard of this coronavirus thing and you don't think it's a big deal, but get inside now, wash your fucking hands.
Yeah.
Stop hanging out with the grandma. Sorry guys, this is so depressing.
Yeah.
But I don't really even know what else to talk about. I was looking at, we haven't really gotten a lot of questions since our last episode. And I was looking at our older questions, and they're good questions and everything, but just given what's going on, I feel weird like bringing them up.
Yeah, I mean, and we might still do that, you know, like, you know, if we end up maybe doing more than one episode a week, or by next week maybe things will have stabilized to the point that it's less pertinent to discuss. Hard to imagine that.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I think I heard that, like, as far as the hospitals and whatnot, it's gonna reach its peak of overwhelmingness. I think they said like late April through May.
Wow.
They predict it's gonna be the worst of it. Yeah.
Fuck.
Man, I was also reading The Atlantic came out with an article that was pretty good, and it talked about like what the end is going to look like. And
dogs and cats living together. Total pandemonium.
They actually kind of compared it similar to like 9/11, where they said like people like, well, healthcare workers are going to be treated. Well, I mean, that's a very like well looked at profession. But they said they'll be seen as heroes the same way like firemen are now. Not to
mention everyone who works at like a grocery store.
Right. They said that too.
They're
like
not
just healthcare workers, but like delivery people and grocery clerks, people that do, you know, like low skill but essential work. And what else was it? They said there'll probably be a big uptick in people that want to go to college for like public health. That sort of thing. Yeah. Talked about how, like, you know, the Generation C is what they called it, like kids that kind of maybe were born after this will just take for granted that you wash your hands for 20 seconds. Like,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to imagine.
Those are all little things, but yeah, it
yeah,
all
but
makes sense.
yeah, and I mean, you still, to this day, you still see after effects of 9/11, and it's a good analogy because, I mean, like airline security that everybody deals with if they fly.
Right.
Most of that wasn't really, or not most, but a lot of it wasn't, it was unheard of.
Right. Or they mentioned that politicians are going to talk more about pandemics as opposed to terrorism, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Okay. Well,
should we wrap it up there?
Yeah, let's wrap it up. Feel free to send us questions, either about the virus or not.
Yeah.
You know, for those just tuning in for the first time, we do rely largely on, well, we don't rely, but we leverage listener questions a lot. We like answering them.
Mm-hmm.
It's fun. And we like, you know, satisfying your curiosity out there with our bullshit hackery.
Yeah.
So get at us at standardpodcast.com.
Thanks, guys.
And thanks for listening. Bye.